The 80s were an era of musical excess, and photographer Mark "WEISSGUY" Weiss was there to document the biggest and most dangerous bands of the time. From Van Halen, Ozzy, Metallica, to Bon Jovi, Motley Crue, and Guns N' Roses, the Decade That Rocked podcast will look back at the period's most historic music and moments through Mark's iconic images. New interviews with rock stars, both old and new, will give fans a backstage pass to the most hedonistic era in music. Along for the ride is me, Mark's co-host, Greg Alprin, music journalist, comedy podcast host, and 80s rock addict, and I'll help shape the conversation from a fan's perspective. Come with us for a decadent celebration of the decade that rocked. All right, Mark, so I think the best way for us to start off this podcast for all the people listening is to explain how you got the name WEISSGUY. There's a very interesting story to it.
I was on the road with Ozzy in 1984. Motley Crue was the opening band. My first shot him in 1982. Nicky asked me if I wanted to go on the bus and ride with them for a few shows. I said, yeah, of course. I mean, they had it going on. Let me tell you,
No kidding.
So, he escorted me on the bus. Tommy Lee was sitting in the driver's side, and he put his leg down so I couldn't pass. And then he grabbed my arms. And while he grabbed my arms and I couldn't move, Nicky started biting my leg. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And he goes, draw blood. And I'm like, what? And he goes, draw blood. I'm like, I don't know what he's talking about, And he wanted me to bite him back and draw blood on him.
Yeah.
So I refused until my leg actually started bleeding. And Tommy was like, pouring the Jack Daniels down my throat.
Right.
And I was in a good spot where I felt I was worthy of drawing blood of Nicky Six. So I bit him back. And then they let me on the bus. And I remember Vince like shaking his head, like, oh, come on, like leave him alone.
Right.
And then I saw, and then Mick later on in that night, after I passed the initiation, which I found out later, I wasn't the only victim.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We sat down, watched the Three Stooges, me and Mick, and one of the guys, I think it was Curly, goes, "Hey, WEISSGUY" in the movie,
right?
And then Mick Mars kind of dubbed me the WEISSGUY, and that's how my name came. And then when I came off the road, we did a spread in one of the magazines, Faces magazine, of that trip, and I put down in the masthead, Mark WEISSGUY Weiss,
Wow.
photos by,
right,
and that was it. It stuck.
And it's here now 40 years later.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, part of what's exciting about this is that we get to talk about, obviously, those types of things on the newer side, but then really also take a look back at the decade and, how that defined and shaped music to kind of where it is today. And, what's super interesting is that, the classic rock scene, which is now where the 80s music falls into, is as popular today, I think, as it was when it was new and fresh, right? Which is a tribute to not only the music and the artists and the longevity, but also the quality of music. And looking at the quality, all things are there. It's the music, it's the image, it's everything that shaped that. So I think that that's what's exciting about us bringing that to listeners through you and your photos, but also by talking to these guys. So, like maybe you can tell us a little bit about what to expect as we take this journey.
Well, it's all about the music. I mean, the music really, because they were persistent, really did stand the test of time, and they are as successful as they were then as they are now. So, it's all about, getting listeners. I'm looking forward to talking with, and not talking with, but having be listened to by the new generation of rock fans. Like
Right.
I always love that young, very impressionable young mind that like sees things and like you said before, in my book they might see a picture of one of the guys in Poison, and then they get exposed to Judas Priest, and they might not even know who Judas Priest was, and then they look in the book and they start exploring. So I'm kind of using my book as a little bit of an encyclopedia of the rock and the music, and actually the fashion that helped create the visual imagery of that time.
Yeah, I mean, it totally is an encyclopedia of the time period. And, I get a kick out of when I see, like a teenager wearing a Slayer t-shirt or a Metallica shirt. And, I get a kick out of talking to them and seeing, like, if they actually know anything about the band. And I'm surprised every time that, at least not every time, but 75-80% of the time that these kids know as much about that band, that their t-shirt they're wearing, that's a band that started in 1982, as they do about anything that may be happening today that's in the rock scene. And it really is exciting to be able to continually expose kids and young adults to the music that really defined an era for me, and obviously for you, and all of this music, and really lived through the world of MTV, that exposed the imagery to people to put it to the sounds.
I feel that the generation, the decade, it was the MTV decade, really, because there wasn't anything before that, and afterwards it kind of fizzled out at the
Yeah,
end of, I don't know when it was, but probably in the 90s
for
it
sure.
started going away. But the 80s really was it, and it really helped brand a lot of the bands. And I just feel that there won't be another genre of music that had such exposure as that. That's
Right.
why they sold so many records and
Yeah.
albums.
Yeah.
It's like it was like MTV was like a radio station.
Yep.
It's like if your song was played on a radio station in your town or in your area, tri-state area, chances are you go to record stores and it sells out there.
Yep.
And the whole idea for these promo guys was to go into each territory. Could you imagine how much what these record company people had to do to work?
Yeah.
And they had to do it. And now it's just on the internet and it's out there. And unfortunately, it goes out there and it kind of goes away pretty quick. Where back in the day, it really stuck around because you had to sell records and to
Yeah.
make money.
Oh, for sure. You had like the guys who were in radio promotion, that had territories. They had to grind it. So a lot more went into getting a band popular and played on the radio than just throwing a clip up on YouTube or TikTok and seeing if it goes viral for 20 minutes. There's a lot more invested into every single band to make it. That's why, the heyday of bands striving to get signed. It doesn't seem like that's the goal anymore for these bands. It's not necessarily to get signed, it's to get a viral video for 2 weeks on TikTok. So really it's I think that's a big reason why all these bands from the 70s and the 80s and mostly the 80s have these rabid followings of people that just consume it, and they're not letting it go, and they're passing it down to their kids and their kids' kids, which is really awesome. And I think what's going to make this really great for everybody that's part of it.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, it's you just got to keep it going, keep the rock and roll torch going.
Amen. So let's end on that for now, and we're gonna keep putting out some great episodes with people that everyone wants to hear, and some new guys and new bands and people that are just influenced by the decade that rocked.
I'm looking forward to reaching out to my old friends
Yeah.
and meeting new friends because, like you said before, we're gonna reach out to new bands that were influenced by these bands that we're kind of like focusing on. But we're going to go outside the box as well.
For sure.
And it's going to be a great time for me to rekindle some old relationships that most of them I've talked to and know and kind of, but this is kind of gives me a reason to stay in tune and to help promote my book too and spread the word.
Yeah, for sure. And everyone, if you have any questions or you want to drop us a line, you can do so at thedecadethatrocked.com, Mark's website for his book, and check out all the awesome pictures, see some great merchandise, and even more merchandise to come. Stay tuned for an awesome celebration of the decade that rocked.